Greetings, good everything, Nubians and others.
Good
Hi.
evening, everyone, everywhere,
Everywhere.
globally.
Yes, and good morning to you, Dr. Carr. What a
I'm
week.
happy to see you. Wait, something happened this week? Oh
Well,
yeah, the New Year. Oh yeah, happy Orthodox New Year. I saw Putin told the Russians to stop shooting, right?
yeah,
Because
well,
it's
they took a ceasefire. I never understood how, okay, we have morality, but we want to blow up a whole bunch of people. But let's wait for Jesus.
yeah, oh, you're right. Let's hold on because Jesus got to be born. Okay, is he here? Okay, start killing again. We're gonna send people to meet him. Hark the herald angels sing. Yeah,
Is,
well,
is this thing called life kind of a exploration into hypocrisy or like contradiction or like it just seems to be very weird what we're in right now. Yesterday, of course, anniversary of the insurrection that I'm still baffled by. Like as I sat and watched it 2 years ago, like, oh, so y'all just gonna let this happen? Oh, okay. All right. The person that started, he's still walking free. Okay. All
still.
right. So we could do that. No, we can't. We can't do that. We it
Well,
would be different if we did that, right? It would be different, right?
in,
The
in
outcome.
in the bar spit by the congressman from Brooklyn past midnight last night, as he said, we can't do Mar-a-Lago. I think he was in the M's by the time he got to Mar-a-Lago. Did you see Hakeem's speech?
No, no,
Jeffries,
I was
man.
watching counting sheep at midnight. So
Oh
please inform.
yeah, nothing but alliteration. You had to pull it up. He
Hakeem Jeffries.
through the whole alphabet at the end, from A to Z, and just we're this, not that, we're this, not that, we're this. But you know how he be with them hands, Congressman Jeffries, Minority Leader Jeffries, all kind of alliteration. But yeah, he mentioned Mar-a-Lago, so we can't do the Mar-a-Lago. He talked longer than Kev, the smallest Speaker of the House in the history of government, world government in the last 500 years. And,
Kev,
and
Kev. You say Kev.
look, Kev. I mean, he doesn't have. He's not a public speaker, huh? That's my first time really hearing him try to give a speech.
Well, you know he's not a public speaker. He's not a very good negotiator. People don't like him. He's not very well liked, and he has no sense of self, or and he can't read the room. Like he's got all of the flaws, so he's perfect for the position, I
No, he's
guess.
definitely perfect. He gets
Yes.
real
It's
up,
like
squeaky. I thought he might cry a couple of times. Well, at least he didn't almost get his ass whipped. I was like, oh my goodness, Matt Gates almost got gathered up there in that corridor. Did you see that?
no,
Oh, you didn't see that? Oh yeah,
no.
my friend had
Please, if you tell
the boy came up on him and the boy behind him grabbed him and pulled him back by the face. It's like, oh man, Gates got to get gathered up in here. And by the end, of course, when they all got sworn in, here's the picture. You got little Bobo, who might have been strapped because they took the metal detectors down the first thing. She's on one side with her hand up. Then Gates in the middle with his hand up. And who is sitting next to Gates? Who on to the right of Gates? George Santos, if that is his name. I'm like, because you remember Santos started playing with his phone on Tuesday. Nobody talking to him. Had a little kid sitting a seat over between them, and he ain't looking over there. By the time yesterday rolled around, he over there back slapping, rubbing up against the Klan caucus. George Santos is in, baby, and he took the oath right next to Matt Gates.
so
Shout out to
because there was no Congress, no House of Representatives, that the cameras can do whatever they want now because there's no
isn't
rules.
that
So we get to see people's dogs, their children, people picking their nose, AOC talking, chatting with people. Like they get to pan in on things we could never see before because there were rules.
it's
There are
no
no rules now. We are literally in the wild, wild west.
where they were. No, I'm sure they're gonna shut that down quickly. Shout out to the C-SPAN crew because they took full advantage of that, didn't they? We saw a little bit of everything. I'm saying, what is Paul Gosser saying to Ocasio Cortez? Except I'm sorry for making a video where I killed you. I gotta give that sister credit because she kept her cool the whole time. Gates was back there trying to float a fake rumor that they was gonna compromise, and she kept saying, that's not what you said. That's not what you said. He tried to turn his back to the camera, but them C-SPAN cameras was. I imagine they'll go back to the fixed camera now, right?
Well, I mean, there are rules now.
Well, they don't have any rules yet. Remember that they adjourned last night before they voted on the rules because we don't know if McCarthy can get the rules passed. He may have had a Pyrrhic victory last night because the first thing they got to do is set the rules. And of course, he gave the whole store away. And if he tries to back up, there's been some reporting that the quote unquote moderate Republicans, which is an oxymoron, but I guess the ones that are scared of the MAGA rocket they rode to fame over the last couple of years, last 6 years, they are threatening, or at least floating, that they may vote with with the Democrats to block some of the concessions, which would only reinforce what Gates and Bobo and them were saying, which is this guy's a liar. Can't trust him. So we're gonna see. But of course, one of the rules is it only take one person to say, I want this guy out, which is a beautiful thing.
So you negotiated yourself out. I'm just, again, as somebody that could care less about, fame or power or whatever, like I want my own power for myself. I just want you to leave me alone. I want to be able to do what I want to do. I ain't trying to control you. But he wanted this position so badly that he gave away any semblance of power that the position actually holds so that he could be the Speaker of the House. I'm just trying to understand, because he was going to be Speaker of the House before, but he got caught up in a cheating scandal, a sex scandal with another. Yeah, he got caught up and he couldn't be it. So now he's like, by any means necessary, I will be Speaker of the House, even if it means I am not Speaker of the House.
How about that? Yeah, the boy said, what he said, oh, last night in his speech, the last thing he said was, one thing that I have shown, that I don't give up. I'm like, dude, I'm 57 years old. I'm in that generation that was the shock troops of integration. So we were the first major group to get bust. My older cousins were the ones that got spit on and yelled at in Nashville. And then we got on the buses in 1970 and 71. And so as he was talking last night, I had flashbacks to some of them little white kids who went to school with, the ones with the little sweater vests, and they get to talk like this. And I've seen this guy before. I don't give up. I'm like, dude, you so weak that it's an embarrassment, right? I mean, come on, Kev. But you're full-on racist now. There are no policy differences between him and these guys. They just didn't like him. And the longer he talked, the more you can see why.
Right.
Oh, he was hot though. He stood there smiling. But last night around 11 o'clock, when they swore back in at 10,
I gave up. I will give up and go to get me some sleep and drink my water.
Well, I watched him and Pam. Y'all, no, that's right. y'all laid it out pretty cleanly the other day. But I tell you, the fun started last night about 10 o'clock. Because on the 14th vote, they crossed him. Because he thought he had the deal. But then Gates abstained. Now he voted present. And so then they walk over there. McCarthy in his face. Gates is a snot frat boy type. We'll say less because he of all the people who could be indicted for insurrection and he gonna get indicted for little girl loving. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation because he already
little girl.
Little girl. Well, I mean,
okay, all right, just
allegedly.
See the one with the son that is a full adult. Is that him? Be the one with the son that's a whole.
Oh, does he have an adult child? Hold on, let's check. The Nubians will know. I mean,
one of them got a child that is 30.
I know his. Well, no.
Was it Gates? Is one of them?
It might be.
Is Gates from Florida?
He is from Florida. It could be him.
He does have a son.
Anyway,
it's irrelevant because that's messy.
No. All of this, I think, all of it, character. I don't know what's in the water in Florida. Got a lot of friends from Florida, and I'm so sorry to all of our friends and family who attended or alumni or supporters of the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, because one of your alums, Byron Donalds, showed his whole natural behind.
Wait, are you telling me that bro went to a HBCU?
I mean, but that's the beautiful thing about Black people. I mean, that's the whole thing. We've been talking about that. There is no we. I mean, people mistake demography for. That's why in the governance category in our Africana Studies framework, governance doesn't mean that we all agree. It just means that who are we to each other? And we've always had outliers. People are beating up Byron Donalds. I said, don't beat him up. I mean, I wouldn't beat him up the same way I wouldn't beat up what's young Tim in South Carolina, Scott. I mean, these guys come from my parents whipped me as a child from the green switch school. In other words, tough love type. Clarence Thomas in that same thing out of Pinpoint, Georgia, and Savannah and all that. My granddaddy did this. I'm my grandfather's son. So you get that mentality. The question becomes, though, when are you going to be used as a pawn? So, I see. Oh, that's right. Look, the Nubians got it. That's right. Hector. I forgot about Hector. He adopted him or something. Or adopt. Oh, yeah.
That's why I'm confused by all of this.
No. I just stepped through the rotten floorboard of that story because it's come back to me now.
The rotten floorboard. You know what's wild?
Shit. back up out.
I'm sitting here watching these, every round of this, and we went into history after we passed 9, right? People get up and they nominate and they give these nominating speeches, right? And the Democrats get up and it's usually like 1 or 2 sentences and it's Hakeem Jeffries. But the eloquence of the Democrats, the intelligence of the Democrats versus the evoking of Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King and the illiterate way in which people are, I'm like, there's some really back-minded people that were elected to Congress because folk didn't get out to vote, because a lot of them are there with like a couple of thousand votes.
Oh, yeah.
Not like millions. This is the House of Representatives. We're talking a couple of thousand votes. Somebody is determining your laws.
That's right.
Who can't form 2 cogent sentences.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it's funny because, yes, first of all, yes. In fact, there was a story in today's Times about Harris County, where my sister and brother-in-law and niece and nephew are. Yeah, here it is. Republicans dispute vote results in Houston. They've captured many of the state houses. I think they have 27 of the state houses. And at the federal level, once they were able to put Donald Trump in 2016 through the use of the Electoral College, they then stocked the judiciary with the stolen seats that they had stolen from the previous administration, the Obama administration, of course, Justice McConnell Gorsuch, and then Justice Beer. And then 5 minutes before the election, the handmaid, Amy Coney Barrett, with those seats, they have kind of now choked off the highest level of the federal judiciary, the Article 3 courts. And what we see now is that we're seeing that replicated on the state house level. They had a setback this week in South Carolina, where the South Carolina Supreme Court ruled that the South Carolina Constitution does indeed preserve a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy beyond 6 weeks. So that was a setback. But in Texas, I'm looking at Alexandra de Moral Mailer is contesting her loss in Houston. She ran for county executive in Harris County, which is, of course, includes Houston. She lost by 18,000 votes, but she's going to court to challenge the election. And in fact, the article starts today. John Rosenthal had seen close races, but his election to the Texas State House in November in a Houston district redrawn to be a near lock for Democrats. Gerrymandering working both ways. Well, not equally, but and the reason they want to pay, they call it packing and cracking, right? That's what they did in Alabama. That's what the Supreme Court case where there should be 2 majority black districts, congressional districts in Alabama. What you do is try to pack as many Negroes as you can in one of them black belt districts and then crack up the rest of them and distribute them around the other congressional districts so you can avoid having 2. And the Supreme Court is, we're okay with that. That's a political question. It's not justiciable. That was the Wisconsin case. I think it was Whitcomb, Gill versus Whitcomb a couple of years ago. Anyway, so just because a district is looks like it's a safe Democratic district, that's probably because the legislature, if it's a white nationalist legislature, they've packed that district so that they don't have to worry about being competitive in several other districts where they might be competitive. So at any rate, Rosenthal won that district by 15 points. And so David Goodman, writing in the New York Times today, says, so it came as a surprise when his Republican challenger in the race contested the results, petitioning the state legislature to order a new election. So you see what's happening now. As you say, Professor Hunter, it's one thing when we don't go out and vote, or we don't vote in large enough numbers, and then that combined with voter suppression tactics becomes something that creates the type of mess that we have now in the federal legislature in the United States. It's quite another when now, even when you have a convincing victory, 15 points in one case, 18,000 votes in the county executive case, they're going to court now and they're going to the legislature. Anybody want to bet against new elections being called by white nationalist legislatures in the South? In other words, these folks have pulled out all the stops. And I, for one, I'm here for it. I love it so much. You got to understand my enthusiasm. We've been here before. Shout out to Commercial Mass News Entertainment Media for completely missing the story this week, including all the black commentators. I kept waiting for one of our, well, I didn't watch it. I can't watch a whole lot of commercial. I watched more commercial news entertainment media in the last 3 days than I have in the last 3 years. because I was trying to see. And by the way, shout out to Andrea Mitchell and Chuck Todd on MSNBC. You talk about a laugh a nanosecond. Watching those two try to spin something is just like, I mean, oh my God, this is, I should be paying y'all for this, but I guess I do pay cable bills, so I guess I am paying y'all. Anyway, I was waiting on somebody to get the story, but I don't want to get too far ahead over our skis with this. Any other things stick out to you since Tuesday, Professor Hunter, in terms of what you saw?
No, I'm waiting for you to tell the story. And I want to admit that while I was on the radio covering this,
Yeah.
I knew that it was theater, right? I knew that it was absolute theater. So my whole thing is like, what do we do now? You have Lauren Boebert, who is by all, accounts, an idiot, who won by 600 votes, and it's questionable, wielding so much power that we are literally in an apartheid system. Our next 2 years are going to be really bumpy in terms of getting anything pushed through, any legislation. You heard the speeches about what they're targeting and what they're going to stop the Democrats from doing, and they want to probably impeach. When that Donald Trump vote came through, I was like, oh, that's the plan, really, is to, Kevin McCarthy talked about it, Donald Trump too, right? Like how he helped him the 11th hour and made, and it's like they wanted him to be Speaker of the House. And people are like, how is that possible? Well, it was possible.
Yeah.
It was possible. And then that would have made him third in line for the White House, and they would have impeached Biden and Harris. And then that was their plan, right? So you think about the machinations that go into people seizing control over the rest of us. And then I ask, what control do we have over ourselves? So that's where my focus has been. And I don't, I'm going to stay there because this chaos is going to continue. It's chaos. It's not building. They're not capable of building, which is what they showed in this thing too. It wasn't about creating or building anything. It was about destruction. It was about stopping. It was about wielding their power and getting more power. And it had nothing to do with the people, because government shut down for 4 days because 20 domestic terrorists decided that they wanted to have more power. And I don't know what Kevin McCarthy gave to each of them, but he gave them something. And I want to know what they got, because that's going to impact us too. I'm not going to focus too much on it, but tell us what didn't get told by the people who were paid to tell us things.
Well, or paid to get ad revenue, I suppose.
Oh, and paid to misinform, right? And paid to keep the fear going, and paid to keep it out. Yes, yes.
Like it was WWF wrestling. I do think though it's worth. There are a lot of teachable minds. We're teachers, so we know with our students, everything is a text. And one of the reasons why I watched so much of it was really fascinating. There are a lot of lessons there. One lesson I think is the limits of diversity and demography as a proxy for power in politics. What do you mean? Well, this is the first people. There are people who might celebrate this is the first time in American history where 2 Black people ran for Speaker of the House. Okay, you see the limits of diversity. You got a fool versus and it's 2 Black men. And that's why you could quote Martin Luther King. And then what killed me was so funny. They had the Latino cat get up and tell the whole story about, my daddy came here, he drove a bus, and then I'm here, had his little girls there behind him, whole family behind him. He puts McCarthy's name into nomination. And then the Latino guy, the third in charge of the Democrats on the Democratic side, gets up, thanks to God for telling this story, and everybody claps, including his children, because they don't know that they ain't supposed to clap. Yeah, y'all are all Latinos. But I mean, this is all and then of course Lauren Boebert gets up, a woman, white woman, and nominates the Black man. I'm saying, now this is a very important. Let's freeze, pause. Do you see the importance of the limits of diversity here? People say, well, we got Black people in representation. No, what are your politics? For many years in Philadelphia, Bob Brady, the United States Congressman, white man, represented a majority Black district, and living in Philly for many years, people say, well, how does this white man keep coming back into the federal legislature from Philadelphia from a district system that's majority Black? Easy. The policies he voted on, the things he advocated for, the things he got returned to his district were very valuable, and people didn't vote based on skin color. Now, I'm not saying that that it isn't important. And by the way, Prof, I thought when you and Pam Keefe were talking about the clerk of the house, that was a beautiful thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sure.
And you think of a person as a clerk, somebody that is they're secretarial. This
Mhm.
woman, first of all, degree from Howard, law degree from
Howard Law degree.
Howard, HU,
HU.
went to Harvard to study, administrative government. I think she's got a PhD in government from like she's a bad woman.
No question.
Her
Yeah,
demeanor, her
very
comments.
senior administrator in the Smithsonian for years as well. So I guess she worked with Body Bunch in them. So I got to ask Kishas and them. Y'all know, I'm sure they do. Because black women in the Smithsonian are thick, man. They don't be playing down there. Them sisters be running the Smithsonian. So I mean, yeah, oh no question. Bad sister.
But even that, as you're talking, the Republicans are about the visage theater. They didn't nominate one woman. They could have, right? If you want to play that game, why not nominate a woman? While y'all were doing your theater, because you knew you were just, it was kabuki theater, right?
Well,
Why not nominate a woman?
you saw the lady, the congresswoman who was from Ukraine. She was the one who
The first one that abstained, yes, or
yeah,
voted.
that's right. And then when she switched her vote, I saw an interview with her, and she's saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to support Ukraine." I was like, "Yeah, because you're a nationalist too. You're a global nationalist." See, it looks like it's local politics. None of that politics is local. It's all nationalist, all global. But if they had nominated a woman, I mean, they had a 3 a.m. bar fight between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Bobo. Y'all supposed to be friends. But Bo was like, no, I'm getting ready to get some committee assignments, broad. So you take that cocktail dress and you saddle on back to them 5-vote victory you got in Colorado, because before we got here in a brawl, because I run an exercise place in Georgia and I will beat your natural. I was like waiting for a brawl to break out, especially since they took down the magnetometers or whatever. So it's like y'all could be in here strapped right now. In fact, in the speaker's election of 1856, there were as many as 300 guns brought in over the course of those several months. So I mean, we're gonna talk about that in a minute. I'm like, how y'all missed the real story? Because that whole speaker's fight from December 1855 to February 1856, the whole fight was about slavery. I'm saying, how y'all black people sitting up in here, and ain't none of y'all mentioned that Nathaniel Prentice Banks was the consensus candidate of something called the new party called the Republican Party. There was a midterm election in 1856. The election, I'm sorry, 1854. The midterm election, then they voted on a speaker. December 54, couldn't get it done. It took them to February 56. But that was the midterm elections. 14th president of the United States, Franklin Pierce. A blood relative, distant relative of Barbara Bush, by the way. They keep it in the house, in the family. The election of 1856 was a three-way contest that was won by James Buchanan. James Buchanan was the Democrat. He beat J.C. Fremont. Fremont was a general in the Civil War that jumped off a few years later because of this mess. Really, when we talk about the Civil War starts in 1861, Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Shout out, by the way, to Preston Brooks, Congressman Preston Brooks from South Carolina, who crossed over on the Senate side with his cane and beat the hell out of Charles Sumner, Senator Sumner, Massachusetts, one of the architects of the.
Wait, please pause. Because I know this story, because I've been the blood, his blood, Charles Sumner's blood is still in the concrete there, right?
How about
concrete. So this was all about this?
No question. And remember, Charles Sumner, by the way, Charles Sumner was born January 6th, 1811. His birthday was yesterday. I mean, it's crazy how these things convert. It was all over slavery. The whole thing was over. It was 1856 when he got elected.
Charles Sumner delivers the speech. He's anti-slavery. He's out there telling people we got to abolish, we got to do this and this and that.
Yes.
This dude beats the hell out of him with his cane, beats him bloody, beats him almost half to death.
Yes.
And this is going on with the House as well.
No question. In fact, yesterday when that cat came over to gather Matt Gaetz, I'm saying this is the spirit of Charles Sumner. Somebody about to get choked out here, choked out on a Friday night, baby. I could do it. And you got to. I know you're gonna watch it at some point. The dude, the white boy behind him, grabbed him. This is a beefy dude. He up in the aisle. You can see him move. He grabbed him by around the neck, and then his hand slid up over his face, and he just in a move. I'm like, yo, and them C-SPAN cameras cut it off. But yeah, the whole thing was. In fact, we talk about the Civil War. We know. We talk about Reconstruction. But the decade that set it up was the 1850s. And we've talked about this before. John C. Calhoun, that's what the father of the filibuster, South Carolina. So anyway, I didn't want to get too far off into that. But and before we move on from Sister Johnson, we should also shout out the two women who were what they call house reading clerks. One of them, the white woman, was alternating with a sister named Talise Ali. Shout out to Talisa Ali, who was doing the counting near the end, the house reading clerk. She worked on the House Committee on Education and Workforce for a number of years. She was the tally clerk. So the sisters were holding it down. Oh, and remember, Prof, before this, if anybody had seen Cheryl Johnson on television, she had a quote unquote star turn in 2020 and 2021. Remember, she's the one who walked the Congress people with the articles of impeachment over to the Senate. So she been regulating for a minute. Regulate. Anyway, Cheryl Johnson. But anyway, shout out to Cheryl Johnson and Talisa Ali. And I thought it was interesting because when the boy from Arizona got up to nominate Byron Donalds the first time, or maybe it wasn't the first time, he said, well, let's thank the clerk. Let's thank Cheryl Johnson. And then, of course, got a rousing ovation, and somebody shouted from the gallery of one of the Congress people, Cheryl Johnson for speaker. Like, yeah, she could be speaker. You can do anybody. And then last night, Kevin McCarthy started his remarks by thanking Ms. Johnson. Maybe he'll let her stay. Maybe she wouldn't want to stay, but who knows? Maybe they'll reappoint. She's been there since 2018. Pelosi appointed her, and Pelosi also appointed Talisa Ali as well.
So these people could lose their jobs because they're going to put their folk in?
Oh, yeah, they will absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I won't say it's a patronage job, but in the sense that, in the case of Miss Ali, in the case of Miss Johnson, Clerk Johnson and reading clerk Ali, these are sisters who are lifers. They've worked a number of different jobs and very, very important jobs on Capitol Hill and in the federal government generally. So, I guess in one way you could look at it as a reward, but knowing the white nationalist party, knowing the Republicans, they may put a 15-year-old in there who can't, count.
Can't read or count, right?
Can't read or count. Yeah. In fact, they may do that just to ensure that they don't have no problems going forward. But, as much.
Can we pause? I'm sorry. I'm
glad to have this conversation because this is what we need. This is what they should have been doing all week on the news. So this is an important conversation we have. Yes, go please.
No one is disturbed. I mean, it again is remarkable to me how mediocre and poorly or seemingly poorly educated or poorly, brained the Republicans are, and showing them, it's like they put it on display. You always say, put your whole brain on display. We got to see people's brains on display, and it was, they were not hiding it, and the contrast was stunning. And you're right. It's like, are we okay with this? Like, no. Is this, or no, but American people, are you okay with this?
That's the question. Ask them the question, Prof. All the people who listen to you through the week, all the people now in Narrative and Nubia, and all the people on YouTube who come in, we got to ask that question. Are you okay with this? Because this impacts your life. Like you said, there was no Congress this week. No Congress. I mean, there are things that we might consider mundane. Some people with 2 nickels to rub together, for example, who might have, for example, let their passport expire and they needed to get an expedited passport. They didn't have a congressperson this week. So there was nobody they could call. There's no congressional offices. That's it. I mean, the things that, we don't think about until we need them. Now, imagine if they're going on for another couple of weeks. Constituent services are real. You think about those people who are staunch Republicans who are immigrants, and they say because everybody worked themselves up by their bootstrap, but they vote locally for Democrats because they get constituent services. And well, if they had walked into a congressional office in Philly or New York or Boston or Austin, Texas, and I need so-and-so, wait a minute, what about, there's been a mix up with my Medicaid or, my Social Security. You don't have a congressperson? It's closed. So yeah, these are real life things. And I'm sure that there'll be some profiles written in over the next several months, and there'll be long feature articles in the Washington Post and New York Times Magazine about somebody who got harmed, and they'll use it to tell the story. But media missed their opportunity to tell the story.
Right.
So,
And
so this,
we need to tell that story. But beyond that, these are the people that make our laws.
that's exactly right.
These are the people that make our laws.
Or don't make laws, as
Or
they say.
don't make our laws, because we know that so-called unfreedom caucus, their whole goal is to stop any laws from being made. Like they just want to just stop everything.
Their goal is to destroy the federal government. And if what we are hearing reported, and by the way, we're all going to know shortly. We're all going to know shortly, because the first act is to pick a speaker. The second act is to make the rules. So we might be going through this again in a 15 seconds from now, because if what is being reported is clear, then the whole idea that part of the concessions are they are going to have 4 of their hardcore white nationalist caucus in the white nationalist party on the rules committee. That means they will have veto power over any rule. Now, if he gave that up, that means, and then one person, they went from 5 to 1. He said, I'm not gonna go lower than 5. Oh no, you're gonna go. You want to be speaker so bad, young man? All right. One congressperson.
Well, he did. He gave that up. He did.
He gave it up. That's what they're saying. But we won't know until, you understand. But let's say that when it comes time to vote on the rules, some of those Republicans peel off, join the Democrats, and say, no, that's a bridge too far. You do realize then that they're going to start to recall him, because they called the man a liar. We know he has no convictions. He'll do anything. I mean, it's almost ancestral, isn't it? On the literal anniversary of the attempt to overthrow Congress from outside, they were able to overthrow it from the inside. I mean, it's like the symmetry is beautiful. Wow. It took them 2 years for the coup, but on the day of the outside attack, 2-year anniversary of it, they finally flipped it on the inside. You understand? But it's going to be impossible to govern because they don't want to govern. This is pure intransigence. In fact, I saw a tweet the other day. Somebody tweeted out, we've already won. Now we're just debating the scope of the victory. That is true. So when you ask, do we care? Are we paying attention? Do we care? Is there anything else? Look, did you see how, first of all, shout out to whoever from Walmart or Target or wherever y'all opened the 3-pack and gave Jim Jordan a t-shirt to wear up under his shirt, because he usually don't have no t-shirt on. Every time I see him on the screen with a wrinkled shirt, and seem like I see all that pink, I'm like, dude, you even have undergarments? Anyway, the point is that did you see how scared Jim Jordan look? Jim Jordan don't want to be speaker. Jim Jordan don't do no work. Jim Jordan is a mile a minute mouth movement. He just wants to be the chair of the Judiciary Committee so he can start investigating. Did you? And last night, for those of you who stayed up and watched it, or like Oz and them, it was probably in the morning there, because obviously it was around, I think McCarthy, y'all correct me in the chat here. What time did McCarthy give his speech? Jeffries and McCarthy went on, what about 1:30? Maybe 1:30? Yeah, he did say governance, Shirlena, many times. Look, I'm gonna say less about my man, Congressman Jeffries, his brother, my friend Hassan, who's a professor of African Studies in history department, rather, at Ohio State University, good brother. But the Jeffries are well studied. In fact, they went to Kemet in 1987 as young boys with their uncle and auntie. But we can talk about that another day. So yeah, a lot of what you hear Hakeem Jeffries say, this ain't new. And I don't mean I'm caping for Hakeem Jeffries either, because this is a neoliberal society we live in, and there are some things that we have come to in the United States of America, for those who are living outside the U.S., and for young people here today who may have gotten the civics lessons in school because they stripped that out. By the way, Kevin McCarthy mentioned that last night, that they're going after what they teach in our schools. I'm like, dude, that's just red meat for your base, because the federal government ain't got nothing to do with that. Y'all always talking about getting rid of the Department of Education, but that's a whole nother story for another day. It's just that education in like marriage and healthcare, that's the provenance of the states, voting, kind of thing. But at any rate, as I was saying, as McCarthy began to talk, some of the things he was talking about are really about dismantling the federal apparatus. So not only do they not want to govern, they have set it up so that they can't govern. And let's say that they vote on everything he said he was going to vote on. First thing out of his mouth when he started talking after he thanked the clerk, after he did a few other things, he said, the first bill we're going to do is to get rid of how many IRS agents had they hired, Prof? It was 83,000. But he said, we're going to get rid of them. Okay, let's say that you vote on that and get that through the House. You know you got to get through the Senate, right? And the president got to sign it, right? They're not going to pass anything anyway. This is all for their crowd.
They hired 87,000 new IRS agents.
87,000. So if you are one of the 87,000 IRS agents that was hired, and you heard that last night and you felt a shiver up your spine, don't worry. They can't do it because that's only one house in a bicameral house. In other words, the Senate not gonna pass that, and the president ain't gonna sign it if the Senate did pass it. Okay, and if when he vetoes it, they don't have the numbers to override it in the Senate. But it goes back to what you said a few minutes ago, Prof. This is why voting is important, and please understand that. So, but I think this week was such a rich lesson, and we could take these 3 days and build a whole course around what we were looking at. And I'm not just talking about the People magazine, TMZ, George Santos, whatever. And shout out to the Brazilian government and Lula da Silva, who was inaugurated on Sunday. We talked about that Monday night in office hours for a bit, because the Brazilians said, oh, there you are. Get him. Because apparently this guy got some charges that they've been trying to put on him by some bad checks and stuff in Brazil for years, but they didn't know where he was. Now the world knows where he is. So the Brazilians are like, yeah, a word with you, whatever your name is, because I've already seen at least one. Have you seen there's at least one other alias he has used? So I don't even know if that's, but he raised his hand. Not that that means anything. Marimba Ani would call that the rhetorical ethic. But at any rate, that's, okay, gossipy, or it's like, interesting. But there are moments that can be used as metaphors and teachable moments, points of entry for larger conversations. Did you see yesterday, for example, was it yesterday or day before, during one of the adjournments or breaks, Marjorie Taylor Greene bending down, looked like she was paying respects to, I only saw a still photograph, speaking with Reverend Jackson, Jesse Jackson Sr., who was sitting in a wheelchair. Probably, I mean, Jesse can walk, but it's probably easy to get.
Parkinson's. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I didn't see that.
They were in the halls of Congress, and she was bending over, and people were like, "What is she saying to him?" Hey, because he was in town because his son,
right,
Jonathan, was sworn in, because Jonathan ran in the special election for Bobby Rush's seat. So
wait, so Jesse Jackson Jr. out,
right.
Jonathan in.
Yep. Jonathan Jackson is now a congressman from Illinois. That was the seat Bobby Rush retired from Congress, and Jonathan Jackson won the election to replace him. But so Jesse was in town. Of course, nobody could go anywhere. The families could. Now imagine you like our young brother Maxwell Frost, 25 years old. And shout out to my sister, young sister, Summer Lee, Congresswoman Lee now, Congresswoman elect up until last night, because she tweeted a couple of days ago, 15 times the charm. I'm like, Summer, how did you know? But at any rate, Summer Lee ain't got no money. Maxwell Frost is couch surfing. The Republicans like, man, you make $170,000 a year. Yeah, but his credit ain't there, and it's DC. So if y'all know anything about that, it could be tough. And Congress people be living with each other. They call them roommates. They get a townhouse or an apartment. They in town, out of town. But I'm saying, imagine you are a relative of someone who was elected to Congress and has limited means. And you thought you got your money together, you got the baby together, grandma came, whatever, y'all got y'all passes, autograph, y'all there Tuesday, and these people showed they behind, and now you got to pay an extra night at the hotel. You ain't got no money. And then you got to pay another extra. Baby, we got to go. There were a couple of Congress people, I don't know, you probably saw it, you may have reported on it, Prof. Somebody's mama's funeral was yesterday, and they came anyway. Somebody had surgery.
They had a doctor's appointment. I was getting clarity on it. I think they had a doctor's appointment. And Hakeem, because I was like, who's the one person that didn't vote for Hakeem Jeffries? And they were like, they left because who thought we were going to keep going? They had an appointment, but they came back for the 10th ballot, I think.
That's exactly right. And if I mean, particularly when you're talking about folks who are not subsidized by the billionaire class. Now, once you're elected to Congress, there are all kind of things that you will be opened up to, because they're going to try to sway you. And this is where I'm going with this. as a point of entry for a teachable moment. But particularly when you're talking about Black folk who are not part of kind of governance formation dynasties like the Jackson family. Jonathan Jackson, okay, we'll spend another night, we'll spring for another night, couple of nights, 3 nights, whatever. But yeah, not Maxwell Frost and Summer Lee. These are, these 25, 26, 27-year olds. They don't have that kind of resources. You see what I'm saying? And so, there are people like that, and you're more likely to find them in the Democratic Party. Now, not to say the Democratic Party is either perfect or that different from the Republican Party as it relates to these rules, which gets to the point I'm about to make in terms of a point of entry. While everybody was having fun with what is Paul Gosar saying to Ocasio-Cortez, we don't need to miss the fact that the white nationalist caucus, this clavering caucus, this little hard knot in a larger field of white violence, that one of the things they want to change with the rules is that they want to be able to have open debate on all bills and amendments added from the floor on bills, because right now they don't. This is a point of agreement with many in the Democratic Party, because many in the Democratic Party, and by the way, everybody was trying to make a false equivalency between the quote unquote the squad and the white nationalists, and see, it's like no. And it wasn't Nancy Pelosi strong arming them alone, although she did strong arm the Ilhan Omars and the AOCs and the Rashida Tlaibs, and of course. But it was also the fact that in terms of policy, these are not stupid people in the Democratic Party. When you talk about the squad, and Summer Lee gonna be right up in the middle of the squad. I'm sure Maxwell Frost gonna be in the middle of them too. I mean, Jamal Bowman and them. The point I'm trying to make is that they are coming in with a policy agenda that is about, and Hakeem Jeffries went through the list last night in his speech. He basically gave a speaker speech and then turned over the microphone. It was so disrespectful.
You want me to play it?
No. Y'all
I
can go.
got it.
Oh, I'm sure you do. I mean, if you want to play
I'll
it.
play it at the end. I'll put it up.
I mean, because again, I'm not capable for the Democratic Party, but what I am doing is saying that to the point that you raised, Prof, which is really the thing we should be thinking about. The fact of the matter is we have to identify what our goals and objectives are, and then try to figure out how we can get what we want. We've talked about this every time we've talked about elections. And at the end of the day, the Democratic Party, when you start talking about capping insulin costs at $34, $35, when you start talking about expanding Medicaid so people can get their health care, when you start talking about enshrining a woman's right to choose in the federal law, these are things the white nationalists voted against unanimously, including Kevin McCarthy. And so when Hakeem Jeffries is going through all those things, you're saying, well, no, this is just Democratic Party. No. What is your objective? Don't take the D and R off and look at your objective. And there was a point of convergence there, which is why Gosser went over there after they floated some propaganda and said, well, AOC said maybe there's some places where they could agree. Maybe we can peel off some Democrats and they'll vote for McCarthy because they like some of these rule changes. And you can see Ocasio-Cortez saying to Gosser, it's not what you said. It's not what you said. In other words, he's trying to say to her, well, I didn't say that. Nah, it's not what you said. You said, I said so-and-so, and you can cut that noise right now. We ain't switching no aisles, bruh. So don't try to pull me in no mess. There's no equivalencies. But there are some convergences. One of them is we want to be able to amend from the floor. Now, does that sound reasonable? Sure. But here's what party politics has done. Party politics in this system we live in. Party politics is not written in the Constitution, federal Constitution or state constitutions or local constitutions. Political parties are not there. People are fond of saying the founding fathers didn't anticipate political parties. Yeah, the founding fathers didn't anticipate that we would be having a conversation. If they would come back here now and see us having this conversation, their heads would explode. Boom, boom, boom. And I would say, good, just don't get none of it on me because I don't want none of that on me, but your head should explode. But the point, though, is that they didn't anticipate political parties. This is the X factor. And it's a two-party system now, but it hasn't always been a two-party system. And in fact, what we've seen this week, talk about another point of entry. Yes, it says D. Yes, it says R. And as I think it was Whip Clark who got up the 8th ballot and was like 212, 212, 212, said it 8 times, right? and said, and this time gonna be 200. Yeah, they stuck together. But what you saw in the Republican Party was a glimpse of the kind of contention that for much of the history of the United States of America was at play. In other words, it hadn't always been two parties. The Republican Party you almost saw them split into two parties. You got this hardcore white nationalists, and then you've got the rest of them in the GOP. Policy, not a whole lot of disagreement. So it's not the same, but it's as close as you would get today to an 1856. Because in 1856, you had the Know Nothings, the Nativists, the Americans. These formations, Know Nothings and the Americans. You remember, Prof, remember, and everybody, remember the movie Gangs of New York? Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yes.
The real Americans, the true Americans, they're the nativists. That was a real thing. And by the way, 1863, that's when that movie was, that's the draft riots. When the immigrants were taking
how many black people lost their lives because?
No question. And how many didn't, because those black women got up on the top of that building and dumped the King of Pain on them white boys when they was coming to burn down another building. The King of Pain were these black women who washed clothes, who took in laundry in New York City. And as the white boys was coming down the avenue to go find some more black people to kill, these sisters on the roof got their big vats with boiled water, put lye in, nails, all kind of things, stirred it up till it was boiling. They called it the King of Pain. Here they go. Boom, put it on them. Anyway, so there are a few black people whose lives were saved because of sisters, but they burnt the colored orphans asylum. That's exactly right. They killed a lot of black people. But in that movie, that Daniel Day-Lewis character is representing the idea of the nativists. In other words, I'm a real American. You ain't no American. Because, but that nativism was one of the impulses of the 1850s. The whole idea was, I'm an American, and as an American, I don't think we should be involved in foreign affairs. I think we should be concerned with what we're doing here. I want to be able to sell my labor for wages, and I want to move forward and make, this kind of thing. So you have that impulse. Heavy Catholic influences, the Know Nothings. In other words, almost like MAGA. Not quite, but it's a close enough metaphor. The MAGA of the 19th century, the Know Nothings. They call themselves the Know Nothings, right? The Americans, the Know Nothings, these nativists. Then you have what they call the Free Soilers. The Free Soilers say, I want to sell my labor, and I want to compete for labor, and I think that liberty is important, and they embrace that, right? And so part of the Free Soiler movement was many of the Free Soilers were also against slavery. So Philip Faulkner, many years ago, wrote a book, Free Soil, Free Labor, Free Men, something like that. It was one of the first books that dealt with this. Again, I'm watching all these presidential historians and all these congressional historians. Ain't none of y'all gonna talk about this since 1923. And of course, Joe Scarborough, I haven't since 1923. And before that it was 1856. And hold on, Foghorn Leghorn. You miss an opportunity. Not really, because you ain't interested in this. You got a little social structure conversation going on, and you really should be interested in it, because what we're seeing now is like the 1850s, except, which is why I wore my George Clinton Parliament Funkadelic Chocolate City shirt today. Remember Chocolate City? Gaining on you. The demographics has changed. We gaining on you. Now you're throwing out Negroes and Latinos on the Republican side, and you got some white women mixed in there because you think no, we gaining on you in terms of a different approach and a different attitude toward the polity. But anyway, I'll come back to that. What you see is you've got in the 1850s, the parties that preceded that, Democratic Party, it's Andrew Jackson, and before that, Democratic Republicans, if you want to call them that, Thomas Jefferson, go back to that, right? But you've got the Democrats. This is a party, the working class, the common people, but it's also the party of the South. And of course, the South is the slave power. Because one of the things is I was watching this, and I'm watching these people completely miss everything in terms of what we can learn from the 19th century. I'm asking, won't any of you bring up what Black people were saying during the 1850s? Because we were around, and all of us weren't enslaved. About 4 million were, but there were hundreds of thousands who weren't. Among them, J.W.C. Pennington, who had written a Black history textbook. William Cooper Nell, Colored Pages of the American Revolution. By the end of the decade, you've got Martin Delany, 1859. Yeah, we read Delany together, Nubians. You remember that? We read Blake, The Huts of America. That's written in the 1850s. And those of you who are narrative subscribers, when you go into, if you're watching this later on YouTube, we encourage you all to please. And in addition, we might as well, just for the fun of it, hit that like button and subscribe to Professor Hunter's channel. We ain't said that in a long time, but it's a new year, so we're gonna revive. Let's just we are full spectrum dominance. That's what we about now. And I think hopefully you can see in these few minutes we've been talking why it's important that we have conversations like this, because ain't none of this been kind of like y'all Negroes had a full week to talk and you missed everything. Anyway, Delany, remember we talked about Delany. And if you go back, all right, pause, get this together so we can follow in a straight line. If you go back through the archive of our conversations, now closing in on the 3-year mark in a couple of months of conversations, we spent several sessions on John Brown. 1850s. It's all tied. The Speaker in 1856. 1859, Harper's Ferry. 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Know nothings. Nativists. You got these parties, right? Nativists. You got the Free Soilers. What is a Free Soiler? A Free Soiler is somebody that says you shouldn't have slavery. Many of them. Not all of them, but many of them. Free Soilers say you should be able to sell your wages, sell your work for wages, and we don't believe in slavery. The Democrats, some are in the North, most in the South, this is the party of slavery, the so-called slave power. Remember 1820, the so-called Missouri Compromise allows for the expansion of slavery. 1850, the Great Compromise of 1850, that's when they established California. And I think they let in Maine as a free state. Maine and California came in as free states. What they're doing is they want to expand slavery. The Democrats and the people in the South, the slave power, they want to expand slavery across the continent. The Free Soilers, many of them don't want to do that. Some of the nativists don't want to do it. Some of the know-nothings don't want to do it. But in the elections, you got all these people got different parties. There's a party called the Whig Party. Now, the Whig Party, you think if the Democrat Party is pro-slavery and you got an anti-slavery impulse, perhaps the Whigs will have some of it. The Whig Party starts withering and dying. The Whig Party doesn't make it out of the 1850s. Because in 1854, the Congress passed and President Franklin Pierce passed into law something called the KansasNebraska Act, expanded slavery into territories. And remember, we talked about this, narrative folk and Nubians. We spent hours on this, and it's all in the archive and narrative. John Brown and his sons go out to Kansas, that's why they call him Old Potawatomi Brown. Because now everybody's running out there. You for slavery, you against slavery. You out there scrapping in Kansas and Nebraska. In Kansas in particular, that's why they call it Bleeding Kansas. They out there fighting. We don't go back through that. Go to the archive or go do a little bit of research on John Brown. You can see all that. My point is this is the 1850s. Now, when you get to the midterm elections in 54, midterm federal elections, you've got a Democrat Party, you got a Whig Party, you got the Know Nothing Party, and nobody has enough votes to elect the speaker. There's 17 different people who were nominated for Speaker of the House after those midterm elections in 54. And the major conflict, anti-slavery versus slavery. And the anti-slavery people are trying to find somebody they can nominate for Speaker of the House, that they can get in as Speaker, because they don't like the Kansas-Nebraska Act. They see the storm clouds on the horizon, and of course, the storm clouds are going to break by the end of the decade with the help of some thumb on the scale Article 3 court named the Supreme Court. What was that famous Supreme Court case, Professor Hunter, of the 1850s? Oh yeah, Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857. Come on, I'm saying, what are we talking about here? Y'all just want to talk about Matt Gaetz, and this is a moment when everybody watching the C-SPAN, as the papers report, C-SPAN viewership shot through the rock. I wouldn't expect C-SPAN to do it. They trying to be, balls and strikes. But you got all this real estate on CNN, MSNBC, wherever, and you have an opportunity to have America's Classroom, and you completely missed it. You completely missed it, but that's okay. That's why we have this space. The point is that they need a speaker that's going to push the anti-slavery agenda. One problem, they really don't have a political party to inhabit. They can't counter all the know nothings. They can't counter all the nativists because you got white supremacy and all that too. So it's interesting. So you got the 34th House of Representatives coming in together, and the majority of people really probably favored barring slavery from the territories. But you got to have a speaker. So then they decide they're going to put three people up, three major people that could be speaker. Lewis Campbell of Ohio, ACM Pennington of New Jersey, and this cat Banks from Massachusetts. Banks is not an abolitionist, but he don't like slavery, but he's kind of a moderate. Campbell goes down in flames. Banks comes close. He gets like 100, over 100 votes, like 107 votes. Because remember, it's only 200 some people in Congress at the time. And so he's close. He's like 5 or 6 votes short, but he keeps coming up short, keeps coming up short. So then they switch him out, put in Pennington, put up Pennington. Pennington gets blasted, say we got to go back to Banks. Banks eventually wins. Banks eventually wins. But the thing it took so long to do to get him in the Congress as speaker, what we saw these last 3 days was a faint echo of that. So last night around 11 o'clock, 11:30, when that beefy cat went over there to tighten up Matt Gaetz because there had been a miscommunication. Apparently, there was another congressperson in the Never Kevins who were supposed to vote for McCarthy, and that would allow Gaetz to vote present. Gaetz voted present, and they thought he was the one who betrayed it. And I guess he was telling them, no, it was, well, I don't know if he gave up the dude, but they all cowards. So he probably did give him up. But anyway, it did come out eventually that was a mistake. But anyway, they was getting ready to slap him around. I'm saying, it just goes to Charles Sumner. During this contentious fight over the Speaker of the House in 1856, according to some of the scholars who've written about this, as many as 300 guns were brought into the chamber. Now, that's crazy. A cane is one thing, but you in here packing? Yeah, because I'll shoot you. I will shoot you. I'm gonna come back to Banks in a minute. Because eventually they get him in, but that doesn't save the country, does it? Because 2 years later, oh, by the way, I'm sorry. There was Banks is sworn in as speaker, and out of that struggle comes a new political party that absorbs much of the Whigs, absorbs much of the Know Nothings, absorbs some of the nativists, but some of the nativists are pro-slavery. So the Democratic Party gets them. They kind of go into the Democratic Party. But this new formation coming out of that 1856 war over politics and slavery, we know it as the Republican Party. That was the birth of the Republican Party. I'm like, what are y'all doing on TV? Y'all wasting time. Y'all selling commercial time. Y'all could be teaching the world a lesson about this, and most importantly, what we can draw from what we're watching that might tell us where it's going next. Because here's a major difference, as we know, between 1856 and 2022 in the United States. And I'm sorry, those of us who are not in the country right now, because we got a global classroom. We ain't here now, but please forgive us, because I know y'all looking at this like people crazy. And
no, actually, I think the globe watches us, which is why Brazil has just instituted Black history, American Black history in their schools, while we won't do it. The world is always watching what America is doing. So this
I agree. And in fact, let's just take 30 quick seconds and pause and note that with the funeral of Benedict, now there's been some possible stirring that perhaps the current Pope Francis might retire, because Benedict said he's first one to retire in half a millennia. And so, Francisco is Pope Francis has been, he uses a wheelchair to get around, this kind of thing. So, maybe he's setting a precedent. Pele's, of course, funeral was there. There's some interesting things around Pele and socialism. Pele is an interesting character politically as well. And of course, the Brazilian government basically made him a wholly owned subsidiary and brand ambassador, but he was not without his own politics. But Pele's funeral, of course, took place. And Lula, as you mentioned, De Silva, has been making this noise that he made the first time he was in. And by the way, it's interesting, isn't it? All these heads of state from around the world went to Lula's inauguration. The United States did not send the head of state, the president or the vice president didn't go, but Deb Haaland went. Does anybody know why Deb Haaland represented the United States, led the delegation from the United States? Let's see. I put it here.
I don't. So let me
Let's,
go,
let's,
let me go into the Nubia chat. Let's see.
let's
Somebody
think.
there knows. Somebody knows.
No question, I'm sure. In fact, Deb Haaland, of course, is the United States Secretary of the Interior, indigenous woman, former congresswoman. And she is very strong, relatively speaking, in the United States. Ain't nobody that strong in the United States political elected politician, but she's strong on the environment. That's why she was picked. In fact, today's Weekend Financial Times, I thought I saw Lula's second. Well, I say Lula's, the Brazilian government's Secretary of the Interior is serving her second term in that role. Here she is. I love how these white boys make these caricature cartoons, try to make them look crazy or whatever. Anyway, this sister right here, this is Secretary of the Interior in Brazil, Marina Silva, fearless campaigner for Brazil's rainforest. And one of the things Lula said in his inauguration speech, which was magnificent, and thanks Oz and those who posted as well and said, I know you down there in the middle of it, his speech for us to look at. One of the things he says, we got to save this rainforest. The reason Deb Haaland led the U.S. delegation is because she's very strong on the environment, relatively speaking, in American politics, and as Secretary of the Interior, and also an indigenous woman. So we call it Indians or Native Americans here again with a social structure framing, but she's indigenous. So she went to see her indigenous counterpart as well. So of course, Silva, imagine that, Silva and Haaland, we gaining on you. Chocolate City, Chocolate Globe, we gaining on you. As George Clinton would have said, we gaining on you. But the we isn't just demographics, it's policy. So the question of what we can learn today from the 1850s, the demographics have changed. This ain't the United States of the 1850s, which of course, thinking about what were Black people saying at the time, sent me back. I'm looking at JFC Pennington. All my volumes of the Black Abolitionist Papers are in storage. So even the one volume, Peter Ripley's one volume Black Abolitionist Papers wasn't as helpful. I looked at Woodson, which you see if you read his book or get his compendium of primary documents, The Mind of the Negro, as reflected in letters written during the crisis. You'll see some reference to the 1850s, a lot of reference. Again, Delaney's in there, all through there. If you get his other volume, Negro Orators and Orations, you'll see speeches given during this period. People like to talk about Frederick Douglass, but what is Frederick Douglass saying? Remember, what to the slaves the 4th of July is 1852. All this is surrounding these politics, and at the center of the speaker fight in 56 was slavery. So after that, I said, well, what were later commentators, later cultural meaning makers, later thinkers of African descent saying about this? And that sent me to Du Bois. It sent me Nubians, for those who remember last Monday night when we read Tony K. Bambara and Vincent Harding, sent me to There Is a River. And a number of other things. Merle Raymond Epps, The Negro 2 in American History, Woodson and Wesley, The Negro in Our History. We've been writing textbooks on American history for a century and a half, actually longer than that, because I don't know if you call Robert Benjamin Lewis 1837 Light and Truth a textbook, but certainly J.W.C. Pennington 1843, and then George Washington Williams, 2 volumes, A History of the Negro in Africa and America. That's 1887, long before there's a John Hope Franklin to write From Slavery to Freedom. So we've been addressing the 1850s, and sure enough, there it is, the sectional conflict, not intersectionality, sectionality. It's not North versus South, it's interest, the business interest, for example, that put their resources behind this new party, the Republican Party. And what are the bedrock principles of this emerging party in the 1850s called Republican Party, that absorbs part of the Whigs, old Whig Party that absorbs the know nothing part of that, absorbs some of the nativists? Their thing is, we want to have business interests at the center of this. And for many of the people who find themselves in the Republican Party, slavery is bad for business. Oh, slavery is bad for business? Yeah. So the business interests are supposed to be at the center of the Republican Party. But watch this. Fast forward to 2022. This Republican Party wants to fight everybody in the world. I don't know, Prof, if you saw, you probably did see, and I was looking around because I don't know. I switched out every time, when the paper comes, I read the paper and then I'll take the other one out. And is this Wednesday? It wasn't Wednesday, it was Thursday. On the front page. Oh, yeah. This is Sam Bankman. You going to jail, baby. But anyway, I think it was Thursday's Financial Times. And I was at the bookstore and we were talking about it. And I said, Apple lost $1 trillion. And they was like, nah. And I pulled the paper out and there it was. Apple lost $1 trillion. That's with a T. It lost $1 trillion stock value. You see Bed Bath & Beyond about to go out of business. The International Money Fund issued a statement yesterday telling the United States Fed, the Federal Reserve, hey, y'all go easy on this kind of monetary policy because, yeah, maybe you think it's going to be a soft landing and it won't really be a recession, but we're not sure because we're seeing these jobs continue and there's still a lot of people who are not working, but there are plenty of jobs, more jobs than people, and the wages are going up. So I don't know about inflation. In other words, there's a lot of instability out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Prof, if you have any thoughts on that, because I mean, again,
they have to we have more jobs than people because people have choices now, right? Which we found during the pandemic.
That's right.
The tech companies made record profits. So while Apple might have lost $1 trillion, how much did they gain during the last couple of years? So we're not factoring that in. Same with the oil companies. So they have to. The interest rates are, the feds have to keep the interest rates driving up to try to put pressure on these companies to lay folk off, so that we can have a lack, so that folk can be scared, so that they, so that the recession can come in, so that they can then lower the interest rates for the people with money to be able to borrow money at a low. I mean, it's manufactured at this point.
Sure.
Right. This fear is meant, and fear becomes reality. You know what I'm saying? That at the end of the day, you say a thing enough times, it manifests. So they are trying to, and the media is complicit. And I hate that we have so few people, and I'm not an economist, but we have people. I used to cover business, Dr. Carr. Knew nothing about business at the time. They put my young non-business knowing ass in the business department to write about business stories I knew nothing about.
But you were a quick study.
I am a quick study, but they didn't know that.
Well,
right.
But
they really didn't. They didn't know that.
But see, one of your many gifts, when you're able to translate, I'm sure everybody followed what you just said. But see, people are intimidated when you say about monetary policies. Oh, I don't understand them. No, slow down. Like you said, this is curated. This is invented. A lot of this stuff is just about perception, right?
Yeah, so have the jobs go up in December, and we wait a minute. They need so they don't know what to do. Like this country is on the verge of something, and it's not.
So let me ask you this then. Given what you just said, what happens when, because there is no Speaker of the House, he's basically like the British parliamentary speaker. You got to do what we say. When they don't raise the debt ceiling, Professor Hunter, what impact would that have on monetary policy and United States credit?
Man, buckle up. I'm.
Why do you? No, seriously, what does that mean? United States credit goes in the garbage can because these white nastics got a speaker that they made. One of the guarantees was, I ain't gonna do nothing y'all don't say. What would happen if they don't raise the debt ceiling in the fall?
It's going to be really bad, and America is going to default on something. I mean, it's just.
And who's going to suffer? Is it going to be the billionaires?
Oh no, they're aren't they prepared? They're prepared for this, which is why they're the ones fomenting this, because they want to hold on to, because they're greedy as F. And I'm saying to myself, all these billion-dollar companies laying folk off.
Right.
I just saw who just laid Amazon, and yes, they have thousands and thousands of workers. They just laid off 18,000 people. Apple's laid off people. Everyone's laying off people. Sirius XM's like, we hiring freeze, everything. I was like,
whoa, look, Macy's just announced they're gonna close some more. They trying to read, of course, Bed Bath and Beyond. Now I don't know.
Bed Bath and Beyond has been on life support for a while, so that's not, to me, that wasn't a surprise. Them Sears and all that, because folks shop online at Amazon. You can get everything. It's set up that way so that you only have 2 or 3 places you can go. That also is a setup. That
Yes,
said, we will feel the pain. The people, we will feel the pain, and the billionaires are setting it up so that they, protect their interests.
that's right.
No longer do we have companies led by people like Ford, who was a complicated person, but understood I need to be able to have a company that the people who are working on these cars can afford the cars. So
Isn't
let me give them a salary and let me give them, like that.
even as a
That doesn't
cold
exist.
and a true anti-Semite, although he has some black friends like George Washington Carver, which is why the scholars argue that he called his factories plants in part as a gesture toward his friend George Carver. But that notwithstanding, what you just said is critical. He's like, what good is it for me to make these cars and the people who are making them can't afford to buy them? This is manufacturing. It's really quite simple when you think about it, huh?
It is. So you've often said people will vote their they will vote their whiteness over their teeth or their health care or whatever. We're in a place right now where it just doesn't make any sense. It's so insane.
That's right.
But by any means necessary
That's
for them.
That's right.
Did
Well,
you
some of them. I think it'll be interesting, won't it? Just like I said, if the 1850s we saw these multi-parties that eventually resolved themselves into Democrat and Republican, do you think we saw in the last 3 days a glint, a glimmer? Because there are Republicans in the federal legislature who are not white nationalists.
right?
But they have ridden the whiteness. People putting this on Trump. No, Trump's a symptom. This is something y'all been playing with this dynamite for 100 years. And now they don't think they can win elections anymore without appeals to white nationalists. Do you think we saw a hint of a fracture? It won't be a new party necessarily, but do you think there are some Republicans sitting there thinking, I can't, okay, we should, first of all, we should have nipped this shit in the bud 2 years ago. McCarthy missed the point. You could have purged this. I mean, but then of course we would have lost some elections, and so we weren't willing to do that. Now you've got the wolf by the ears, as Thomas Jefferson said on the slavery question. Do you think there might be some Republicans? Do you think we might see something that will surprise those who are not paying attention if some of these Republicans, because that debt ceiling is so important, say, F it, I'm going with the Democrats?
Yeah, I think we will. I had a conversation this week with Michael Steele on his podcast, which was interesting.
Yes,
So, and people were putting him up as the same token as Donalds. Michael Steele's not Donalds. Michael Steele is a person that actually.
Now I've been enjoying watching him because he tried to tell these white boys 20 years ago, and they slapped him around so bad, and he been taking a victory lap this week.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they had an autopsy. I think you're absolutely right, and I think there are people that there are black people that hold true to true Republican values that can't be in line with this, and they're Democrats not because they want to be Democrats, but because they can't deal with this.
Did you see that? Straight up, and he's looking at look at his eyes. He's looking at that hand. He making sure the hand is in there. He ain't looking in the camera.
What is that, Dr. Carr?
Well, you know what that is. That's the white supremacist. And by the way, I'm sorry. I know the Noop's birthday was yesterday, a day before yesterday, Cap Alpha sign. That is not the Kappa sign. That is the white supremacy sign. The global, the Steve Bannon white supremacy sign. Talk about 300 guns getting brought in the legislation in 1856 when they was trying to pick a speaker. You heard Marjorie Taylor Greene talking with Steve Bannon, talking about, see, if me and Matt Gaetz had that insurrection, we'd have had the guns. We would have won. What the hell? So this boy right here, George Santos, they got another recruit. And last night when they swore him in, y'all go back and look, when McCarthy was reading the oath, he was standing next to Matt Gaetz. He's in now. He ain't no pariah.
Yeah, and he ain't going nowhere, even with all of that baggage. They will take your baggedy, raggedy ass as long as you're going to do what they say and be this is what we're up against, and it absolutely makes no sense, and it makes all the sense in the world. And when you put it in historical perspective, and not that you can necessarily, as you say, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So what's the rhythm of this, and what's our responsibility in this, right? So like, we're not victims. I'm not going to sit back and just, you go ahead, put your white power symbol up if you want to. You're going to F around and find out if you come in this space, right? But we got to be ready to make sure that there's a find out component to the F around. That's all. I'm working on the find out component. I don't know what y'all working on. I'm working on the find out.
Come on, you know what? I can't believe you are conjuring pure ancestors today, because first of all, and I know we're going to mention her and weave her. Let's just introduce her right now. in terms of politics, that question of Republican values, self-determination, self-sufficiency, it's kind of the thing that they claim and have really morphed from. I was rereading my man Michael Fauntleroy's book, Republicans and the Black Vote. There are a number of books on Black people in the Republican Party, but Mike makes that point. In the 20th century, you see the Republicans get away from that. They try to push it. But anyway, it would have been nothing in the 1940s or 50s for Zora Neale Hurston to be a Republican. Because again, one of the things that she would say over and over again, and this is just taken from African ways of knowing in the United States, every tub must sit on its own bottom. That's a very deep, culturally kind of grounded perspective that is very familiar to people of African descent. You go out there and work by the sweat of your brow. And so if you and this is what, in some ways, Mike Steele came to Howard. I hadn't been there long. He's over the RNC at the time. And of course, we was going to slap him around a little bit, and he got tightened up a little bit. But at the same time, there are certain things that nobody can dispute. So when you hear Byron Donalds of Florida, when you hear Tim Scott of South Carolina talk about, I was raised in a household where you had to work and you had to have discipline, and I think we should have prayer in the schools and whippings is okay. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I mean, there are a lot of Black people say, yeah, I'm for Democrats when it comes to health care. But I don't believe in killing no babies. Okay, well, but do you believe that you should tell somebody else what to do? Well, it depends on whether I'm a primitive foot washing Baptist or AME. In other words, if you want to see, there's a difference for many times in terms of our politics between what we want for ourselves and our families and our communities and what we are willing to try to impose on other people. And there's this curious kind of alloy of live and let live in African communities, some of it as a result of the traumas we've been through. So we don't want to impose on other people, and the values that say, I wouldn't do that myself. Gay marriage, abortion, these are, in our governance conversations, very complicated conversations. And we have to be very mindful, but there's also a sense of tolerance in Africana communities as well that's commingled in there. Everybody's not the same, but I'm saying what you're raising, Prof, is very important. And while you have a Michael Steele, who in some ways is an echo, strong or faint, depending on the issue, of an Ed Brooke or a Jackie Robinson before the betrayal of Nixon and others. I mean, perhaps a Zora Hurston in them. Zora Hurston was like, I'm not for Brown versus Board of Education. I think this is a mistake. We just need to strengthen our institutions, because she came out of all Black town, Eatonville, Florida. I mean, it's a complicated conversation, but this Republican Party we dealing with now ain't none of that relevant. That's why I ask you, for those who may have some of those things in that party, and Byron Donald, I'm looking at him with every vote after they brought him up there as a hand puppet, and then he went to switch to McCarthy. By last night, he was like, McCarthy, faded back. You tired, bro? You tired of being used? You okay? All right, bro? You gonna get an assignment. You're gonna really get to shine, because this was the easy part. Picking the speaker was the easy part. The rules gonna be harder than the speaker. The debt ceiling gonna be harder than the rules. There will be no governance from the House of Representatives over the next 2 years. What there will be, however, is a commercial for what you should do in the elections of 2024. And so perhaps we saw a preview of that fracture over the last few days. They will probably, I don't know what they're going to do. I started to say that some of them will probably switch, go across the aisle and maybe not vote for all those rules. But if they do that, that's the nuclear option. Kevin McCarthy is not speaker anymore. Some of them will probably vote to raise the debt ceiling. But if they do, Kevin McCarthy's not speaker anymore. If that rule, that only one person, you only need one person. We don't know. Hakeem Jeffries might be the speaker before 2024. I expect, if this thing can, and here's where as we kind of wind to kind of sum and think about this, guided by the question you raised at the beginning. What relationships, what influences can we have on the polities we live in? What are our goals and objectives, and how can we best achieve them? Why should we be paying attention? All this is very important. It ain't just gossiping, because the people who are going to be harmed first are the least of these. And so, I guess what I'm saying is that if we get more engaged, because voter turnout was lower in Georgia in the special election that saw Senator Warnock return to the federal legislature for a full term. It was lower. It isn't that, the Republicans, they brought this up over and over again this week. They had over 3 million more votes total in the midterm elections than the Democrats did. And they only got a couple of seats over. So in 2024, if people continue to pay attention, and that's a long time, it's an eternity in some ways. If Hakeem Jeffries is Speaker of the House in 2024, what I was watching this week, Prof, I'm going to be interested in hearing what you think about this. I suspect that we were watching an audition for the presidential primaries of 2028.
Oh,
absolutely. Hakeem Jeffries ain't going to just be in the federal legislature, and he ain't going to be just United States Senator. Chuck Schumer. No, I'm looking at this cat like, yeah, this is 28 right here.
Oh,
the way he carried himself, the way he played it pitch perfect.
yes. Oh, listen, I wouldn't be mad at that because he's New York.
Oh no, see, that's the thing. Unlike Barack Obama, whose affect was always a little inauthentic.
It was Harry Lennox.
It was well, Harry Lennox more authentic than Barack though.
No, it was Harry Lennox.
Oh, you're saying that's right.
It was Harry Lennox.
My God. Boy. Harry look. Was it Harry Lennox or the Martian?
It was Harry Lennox.
He morphed into Barack Obama. He ripped off Harry Lennox, huh?
Yeah.
But yeah. Congressman Jeffries comes by that honest. Now, again, you don't get where Hakeem Jeffries is without being 180 proof safe. So he ain't no rah-rah hero. I'm sorry. He ain't no rah-rah hero. Anyway, I mean, this is all, but he is who he is.
Wait a minute though. Unlike anybody else, and being in this space, having been in New York on the journalism side, and knowing Leonard Jeffries and that family better than I do.
Well, and by the way, prayers to Dr. J. He had a procedure last week. He's resting comfortably, him and Mama Rosalind. Very important figures, towering figures. And I'm just trying to figure out why they ain't try to hang Leonard Jeffries and Rosalind Jeffries over. And that tells me that you have passed every test that they can give you, or they're waiting. I can't figure it out, Prof.
I think we're at a point now. And I'm not saying that you're wrong or right or whatever. The office.
I don't know. I'm telling you, I don't know.
And the office of the presidency is what it is, right? It's not a transformative office to begin with, right? It's the chief of the military, and it is the person that can sign in executive orders. It's it's not king. It's not king. It's more statesman. It's the representative of America.
Good point.
Whatever she is, right? So I think, of all of the people, any of the people, and I'm not even talking about whether he's black or not, but his grounding sensibilities, I really do. When the people got up to talk about that he cares about people, I really do think he cares about people. I don't think I don't feel like because he had opportunities to show himself to be a political animal for the last 20 years.
Absolutely.
You know what that looks like.
Absolutely. I mean, and he's made some decisions that made it clear to them that he wasn't going to. For example, I mean, okay, go back to Gates and Boebert and them. One of the things that they apparently extracted from Kevin McCarthy was that McCarthy will not use his PAC and connections to run against their white nationalist candidates. Now, when you look on the other side, Hakeem Jeffries got no problem going after progressive candidates. That's a problem. You know what I'm saying? Stay out of these races. Look, Chantel Brown got sworn back in. But you interfering out there, you and Jim Clyburn and run out Ohio, interfering with Nina, that pisses me. I mean, look, man, just stay out of it. I mean, you can pick who you want, but Hakeem Jeffries has sworn fealty. I will protect this party. And part of what the white nationalists are doing, what Gates and them are saying is, this two-party system y'all got, where we all got to stay in line and nobody gets to read the bill, and then one of the things they extracted was everybody gets the X number of time to read the bill. So some of the people on the other side like, yeah, I want that too. Why? Because when Pelosi do this, we come out and vote. I can't say nothing. I mean, you can push a system until you break it. And I guess what I'm saying, one of the unintended consequences here might be, because I can tell you, I know Summer, this is not going, at some point, Hakeem gonna have some problems. It sounds good. We all moved, but this whole notion of stand up and salute, I don't know that, man. That Frost is.
I don't know that he would. Nina had her own issues. I don't think it was about being a progressive as it was. There was more to that race. It wasn't just progressive.
Of course.
So and as I'm looking at AOC, Summer Lee, even Cori Bush, I don't think there's going to be much of a problem. I don't think that Hakeem Jeffries wants to keep them in line, because we need them. We need all of the people who are actually rolling their sleeves and working. Let's just say that. I'm not saying AOC is that. I'm saying Cori Bush is that. I'm saying Summer Lee is that. I'm saying Yana Presley is that. I'm saying that, Lauren
Underwood. You see how Lauren
Underwood, yes.
When they escorted McCarthy out to bring him back in as speaker, it was very interesting to see who they named to go out in the chamber. Lauren Underwood was one of those people. You can see how they positioning her to me. She's kind of like Johanna Hayes almost in some ways. Lucy McBath maybe a little bit, but yeah, you can see these sisters moving through the leadership ranks. Yeah,
because the Democrats are not the Republicans.
They are not the Republicans. No question.
District to district, there are different needs, and people are coming into Congress with fighting for their folk. Unlike the Republicans, who are fighting to stay in power and fighting for their whiteness. These folk are actually fighting. So it's a different leadership position for him to wrangle folk. And it's more personality driven. And the fact that those 212 never broke ranks told me everything, because they don't agree. But they understood one thing. And this is what I'm saying about Black people. So for me, it was a lesson in what's possible, because we ain't got to all agree on anything, but we got to get in line when it comes to the thing that matters to all of us.
Absolutely.
Which is our freedom. And if we can't do that, then it's, and they showed it as possible that those folks don't agree on a whole lot, because the Democrats are more fractured than the Republicans if people want to really have a conversation. But they all 212 got together and they never broke for 15 damn rounds, never broke. And that said a lot,
You're absolutely right. I mean, the Democratic Party looks more like the people in the country. And so, we all don't agree on it. And you're right. And that's a very important point you raise in Prof, because policy-wise, sure, there are going to be disagreements. But when Rep. Jarpaw said, y'all always talking about Dems in disarray, this is Republicans in ruins. It's like, yeah, you're right. That is no small feat for them to come together like that and to stay together. Had they won a few more seats and had it been a razor-thin Democratic majority, I think we all know that there would not have been this type of hostage-holding exercise. That the Progressive Caucus wouldn't have done it, the squad wouldn't have done it. You're absolutely right. And that's why I'm glad you're raising this too, Prof, because that's why when we look at how social structure media narrates these things, we can't listen to that stuff. It's false equivalencies. So when they go in and when they attack Ilhan Omar, for example, these funky racists, when they attack these folk in the Democratic Party and say they're not Americans. No, they're not Americans. No. Because if American means white Christian nationalist, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm not an American. In fact, I wouldn't say I'm one anyway, because you can't tell me what an American is. I'm here now, though, and we gaining on you. And guess what? You can't stop the rain. So when you start thinking about coalition politics, there's a couple of things I just want to mention right quick. We have to understand that, a couple of things. And this is one of the things I love about the fact that as we go into Monday night, we'll finish up with, we're now transitioning Monday night in our Introduction to Africana Studies class and office hours on Monday nights in Nubia. We are now moving to part 2 of our course. Part 1 was the conceptual categories. And now as we go into part 2, we're perfectly positioned to continue this. We're going to revisit many of these topics as we go through part 2, because remember, part 1 was the conceptual categories, each of them moment by moment. social structure, governance structure, ways of knowing, movement and memory, cultural meaning making. Now, part two, we now will apply those categories through time and space, beginning with the origins of humanity, taking it down through the current moment. And so we're going to revisit a lot of this stuff in the context of those categories. But one of the things that we frame well is we're now, those conceptual categories are sufficiently distinctive to share, to us to share our collective study, dialogue, informed action, all that. And as you're talking, Prof, it is a powerful reminder of why we have to study, why we have to at least have a basic grasp of history. Because, as you say, it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And there are echoes. Every time you heard people say this past week, this hasn't happened in 100 years. Okay, the first question we should ask ourselves in the African States framework is, while it hasn't happened in this social structure in 100 years ago in 1923, governance, who are we to each other? What was going on? We didn't have anybody in the federal legislature. Remember, George White was the last one in the federal legislature in 1900, 1901. And you had to wait then before the Chicago contingent comes back in. And that didn't happen with Mitchell and then, Oscar the Priest. That's the 30s. There are no black people in the federal legislature in 1923. And the dire anti-lynching bill is dying. Black people getting killed. It's after World War I. Black people come back. The Red Summer, 1919. 4 years later, you had this election. Oh, they haven't had a speaker fight. What was going on in the United States and what was going on in the world in 1923? So the question we have to ask isn't a cosplay pundit conversation that obscures history by whitening it and making it into some fantasy. We have to say, what does our study teach us? Black men, black women could not vote. So, well, they had the 19th Amendment by then. Yeah. Or did that really change the condition of black women? No, that just put black women in the same condition as black men. And it took the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act to do something about it in the South. And there were some black women and men who could vote in the North. And if you were in the South, maybe if you registered as Republican, you could vote. But the point is, it's a different set of circumstances. And then before that was 1856. Okay, now let's talk. I had a conversation earlier this week with Kermit Roosevelt. Interesting guy, professor at University of Pennsylvania. Actually, his research and teaching assistant, one of my former students, brilliant young sister, Layla June West, Dr. Beatty and I, and Dr. Watkins, she's our student. She's at Penn Law School now, finishing up there. She's one of Kermit Roosevelt's. I told y'all this book last week, The Nation That Never Was, Reconstructing America's Story. What Professor Roosevelt writes here, and he's echoing in many ways things that have been written by Lerone Bennett, Vincent Harding, so many others, but he kind of extends it and puts the legal gloss on it, even though it's written for a broader audience. He says, what you have in the United States is a battle between the Founders' Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, the one they keep like trying to talk about. And even last night, somebody mentioned George Washington. George Washington was in these halls, and I'm looking at the black Congress people like, will somebody please at least make a face like something stinking here? You should have been trying to kill George Washington. Anyway, the difference that Professor Roosevelt says between the framers' constitution, the founders' constitution, which is about individualism and liberty and all that stuff, and the Reconstruction Constitution. He says we live in a society that was really started in the 1850s and 60s. The Civil War, Reconstruction. Decade leading up to the Civil War, and Reconstruction. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments makes it a different country. And so that is what enables the possibility, not for us to become Americans and salute and the flag and the lapel pins, all that BS and the oaths. No. How do we live our full humanity in a society and tamp down those elements that would prefer their selfish, individualistic, racist, classist, sexist attitudes and policies over a collective formation that isn't, by the way, just the United States? Because remember, the Republican Party in the 1850s is a party that's founded out of business interests, many of them anti-slavery because they see slavery as bad for business, competition, this kind of thing, wages, however you want to put it. They want to break the back of the slave power. They don't want it to expand, many of them, not all of them, but many of them. And then they have morphed now, because remember, for years, the whole thing with the Republican Party was free trade. Now you're talking about tariffs. The nativism has reappeared. Now it's the U.S. versus the world. We got to slow down. Can you say that again? It's the U.S. versus the world. Okay. Now, where are you? Oh, I'm in my congressional office in Georgia. Where am I? Or you're in the CNN studios. You're in the Fox studios in New York. And how are we communicating? Well, we're communicating on, okay, all these metals and all this stuff put together was made in America with American stuff that was mined in America. Head explode. Why? Fool, you don't live only in the United States of America. It's all interconnected. The nativism of the white nationalist party now is going to kill the many of it's not, well, I won't say kill, it's certainly going to erode the quality of life and possibilities for many people, not those rich people, but the poor people who go out and vote. We have to begin to think about that in that context. When Roosevelt says that the Reconstruction Constitution, it's a war between the Reconstruction Constitution and the Founders Constitution, he starts talking about the courts. He was also, Professor Roosevelt was also on the commission that Biden put together to look at reimagining and recommending what can be done with the federal courts. And so, can you have term limits in the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, retirement age, perhaps? Could you have a situation where you decentralize the Supreme Court, you expand the court, have at least as many people on the on the Supreme Court as there are judicial courts of appeal? It's very interesting, some of the things they propose. Now, who's going to be against that? The white nationalists. Why? Because they have minority rule right now, and we gaining on them. So what we saw this last 3 days is very interesting, isn't it? How many times, Prof, do you remember, did we hear, and everybody who's, watching and in the conversation, how many times did y'all hear these Republicans bring up, we have 90%, they got 10%, this minority rule, the tyranny of minority? That's how y'all win elections. Oh, you only like white nationalism when it ain't white on white crime. Because see, this is how y'all win. It's the electoral college. It was so fascinating to watch them complain about being held hostage by a minority. Really? That's what has begun happening. Not in 1856. And then that's what sent me back to W.E.B. Du Bois. Go to chapter 3 of Black Reconstruction in America, The White Worker, where he walks through. In fact, let me just I just want to mention this. He says in The White Worker, that says chapter no, I'm sorry. The White Worker is chapter 2. That's where he gets into the international politics of the 1850s. But chapter 3 is The Planter. He says how 7% of a section within a nation ruled 5 million white people and owned 4 million black people and sought to make agriculture equal to industry through the rule of property without yielding political power or education to labor. This is what happens. The tyranny of the minority isn't about protecting rights for these people. The tyranny of the minority that they want is the right to tell everybody else what to do. But when they got applied to them, what really got applied to them the last 3 days was the hard white core that has been the engine of their ability to keep this criminal enterprise going in the way that it's been going in this slide over the last 50 years as a response to the human rights movement we call the civil rights movement, which was an international movement, by the way, with local implications, which is nothing they hated. But the point I'm trying to make is that it is on the verge of fracture now. And all it's going to take to be renegotiated is for us to participate in our own interests, not continue to kind of go along to get along, because there are many things that the federal legislature could have passed with just a few more votes. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Guess who voted against it? Byron Donalds. You voted against it. Why you vote against it? Because you a stand-up, tap dance. Would you ever see Yes Boss? I'm not, until you get stopped by the damn police. Then you want to cuss somebody out. And then when you laying on the ground with your face in the concrete cussing and everybody filming it, then what? Is it going to be enough to change your opinion? No, there wasn't enough for Tim Scott because he wrote a book with Confederate Gumby. What was his name? Anyway. I see he did the Benghazi. Now he's not in Congress anymore. Trey Gowdy, about being stopped by the police, and it still wasn't enough for him. He just want to have dialogue. But I want to mention one other book before we kind of wind it up today. This is a brand new book that just came out. Jacob Grumbach. It's called Laboratories Against Democracy: How National Parties Transform State Politics. It's very interesting. He's a professor at the University of Washington. His basic argument is, going back to this question of political parties, is that the two parties in this country have become, he says, nationally coordinated political teams. We know that. But they operate as national kind of conceptual formations that apply pressure and shape policy at the state level. And that's federalism. That's what we learned is federalism. But here's where it changes. This is what the White Nationalist Party has done. Having weaponized these national identities, I'm proud to be in America where at least I know I'm free. Yeah, all that hillbilly talk, except you in upstate New York. You in New York sending George Santos to Congress. You in Ohio voting against your interests, but you got a bridge, and Mitch McConnell and Mike DeWine and all of them was out there with Sherrod Brown and Joe Biden out there while this debacle was going on. Y'all want to thank God y'all got this bridge finally, crumbling bridge between Kentucky and Ohio, and I know exactly where that is, having driven home from Columbus, Ohio to Nashville, Tennessee many times during law school and grad school. But you want to shrink the government. Why is that? Because these national brands operating at the state and local level are allowing these folks, through gentrification, voter suppression, to send to the federal legislature people who are basically singing "Onward Christian Soldiers," white Klan nationalist Christian soldiers, to destroy the government. And what Grumbach is arguing is this isn't just gridlock. This could make the system collapse. Now, what Roosevelt is arguing, among other things, is that if you want to have a different society, in fact, he says at the beginning of the book, he quotes Langston Hughes, "Let America be America again." But at the end of the book, he says, I would just make one little change. Let America be, because it never was, and not let America be America again. If it's going to be something different, it's going to have to be something completely different. And in fact, let me end with this. I want to mention, because again, I'm thinking 1856, this guy who becomes a speaker is elected speaker. And I think about it and I'm like, let me check something, because that name is not unfamiliar to me. And sure enough, here he is. I found him in a book on General Oliver Howard. Yeah, that's the guy Howard University is named for. Yankee stepfather, the white man, Freedmen's Bureau. Check this out. Check this out. This is the Civil War. This is 1864. The Army commanders were perplexed by the freedmen, because by 1864, the South is being beaten back. Black men are now in uniform. Some places like Port Royal, South Carolina, Davis Bend, Mississippi, parts of Louisiana have been freed for a long time. African people have freed themselves, as Du Bois writes about. And so they all commingled in these army camps. Remember Will Smith in Emancipation, right? The Army commanders were perplexed by the freedmen. White conservatives who complained that the Negroes were favored under General Benjamin F. Butler, who was assigned to Texas and Louisiana, were troubled less by more moderate generals from Massachusetts. Were troubled less by a more moderate general from Massachusetts, Nathaniel Banks, who replaced him. I thought Banks was a congressman. He was. But then the Civil War jumped off, and Banks became a general in the Civil War. A lot of these cats who were in the federal legislature, people are going to West Point, like General Howard, Clinton B. Fisk University. Shout out to the Fisk University gymnasts. Did y'all see them young girls doing that? Look, this is what I'm talking about. Y'all talking about Coach Prime. Go check these sisters out. Did you see that prop? The young sister did the vault and got like a 9.9 on her first try. I'm saying, see, this is what I'm talking about. Anyway, these cats went to West Point, and then they chose up sides. Robert E. Lee, West Point. They chose up sides, and they met each other on the battlefield. Banks left the legislature, became a general in the Union Army. It says by decree, Banks established a sound school system which flourished when the Freedmen's Bureau was created. So Nathaniel Banks, that speaker, went on to help establish schools in Louisiana for Black people before the Freedmen's Bureau. I'm saying, how y'all miss all this? I know y'all got some, and they got staffs. Who we got? It's you, me, Reyes, Carl, Ahmad, some interns, and everybody else. Meanwhile, you paying people at CNN. Somebody need to be fired. Anyway, also during the Banks administration, the Negroes got an important start in politics. Negro leaders asked for the vote, first for the freeborn and later for the freedmen. Lincoln had recommended limited suffrage when Louisianans met in Constitutional Convention in 1864. It was not granted, but the legislature was empowered to consider it, an action that the freedmen and their radical supporters, including Thomas Conway, took as an invitation to keep the subject very much alive. The Tribune criticized Conway severely for not having forced Banks, same Banks, former Congressman, Speaker of the House, now General, into act in 1864 when an edict of Negro suffrage by the Army could have achieved what was so agonizingly sought in 1865. But watch this. I'm going to end with this from Yankee Stepfather. In addition to starting schools and taking an ambiguous stance on suffrage because Banks didn't push the vote, General Banks, faced with genuine problems of mass destitution, initiated a system of forced labor. We haven't had the longest one was 1856 when they went to 117 ballots. And okay, who was the guy? Banks. Okay, who is Banks? Let's find out who Banks is. General, fighting in the Civil War, got black people under his command, also black people who are victims of enslavement fighting back, and now they got to figure out their way between slavery and freedom. And what does Banks do in Louisiana? This former Speaker of the House. It says General Banks, faced with genuine problems of mass destitution, initiated a system of forced labor, which anticipated the worst aspects of the black codes, including the vagrancy principle of discipline, which Mayor Kennedy adopted and Conway protested. Louisiana, which was the best prepared state, which was ripe for the most thorough reform, reaped the worst system of Negro labor devised in the conquered states. Negroes who had neither homes nor jobs were sent to plantations, where they worked for fixed wages, experienced slave days discipline, and were denied the option of leaving their jobs until the crops were in. That's General Banks, former Speaker of the House Banks, Joe Scarborough, and all the rest of you people who are his children. We should not have an investment in this criminal enterprise that is not informed by what has happened to us every time we have bought in without knowing what we were doing. The reason we study the past is to understand the echoes. So what we are seeing now is a war within whiteness in federal politics. What should we be doing? Identifying how we can use that to our advantage. Because guess what? Every time it's to our advantage, it's also to the advantage of everybody else. We should never forget that.
Yes.
I mean, it's true, right? Every time we want something, we don't never just want it for us. You know, that's what, Proud. This is what bothers me, right? Looking at those people in there, and you'll see when you play Hakeem's speech, everything he talked about benefits everybody. How can y'all be against this? How are you a woman in that legislature, in that Republican side, trashing these people when every policy being advocated impacts you? Child care. All them children in there that was up past midnight. You got child care. What about the millions who don't? You are some of the most cruel people. Anyway.
Well, I mean, if somebody said, "What's wrong with white men?" Somebody tweeted that, and I said 400 years of unchecked power and prowess without ever having to work on your humanity. So, I don't know what that looks like, but we're seeing it, right? Because to be in alignment with these policies means you absolutely have no humanity at all. I'm watching Gangs of London, the most violent show I've ever seen in my entire life. It's so violent.
Peaky Blinders?
No, it's more violent than Peaky Blinders.
Really?
I didn't think it was possible, but I was like, yo, this show, it opens with a scene where a guy is holding a guy over a building on a rope, pours gasoline down the rope, sets the rope on fire. The man is on fire. The rope breaks and he falls like hundreds of feet. I'm like, this is the most violent. This is the opening scene of Gangs of London. But I know that level of inhumanity is fostered and fomented and it grows because if nobody ever holds you accountable which is what we also seeing. We watched January 6th, and just a handful. The black man, I think, one of the people that got the longest sentence was the black man that swung on a cop, not the person that actually killed the cop.
Right.
They didn't get the 5 years.
Right.
So
Or the president of the United States.
Or the president of the United States. That
or Jenny Thomas, who was out of the January 6th report.
Who funded it.
By her friend Cheney.
Right. So if you don't get held accountable and you just get away with all of the stuff, and there's expectation that that is your right, that's your birthright. So all of these policies that y'all are talking about to help other people, we don't care about other people. We just care about ourselves. And this is stopping us from being as powerful and on top as we want to be. So I get it.
And it's just interesting because as you say that, I'm thinking again about what we were saying earlier. This is how we end up with this past week. What you just said, you didn't nip it in the bud, and it isn't enough. Demographics is not destiny, because what's the woman's name? Well, she changed her name. She got a 3 name now. They want to make her the white nationalist AOC, Luna, the swimsuit.
I'm paying zero attention to them.
No, she's a military veteran, former swimsuit model, and she worked for Charlie Kirk. But while she's in the Congress now, she got up and nominated somebody at one point. And I'm only raising that to say that she's Latina. That's why I mentioned that. I think Mexican American, first Mexican American elected Republican out of Florida. So I'm saying all that to say that it isn't enough. Don't assume because of how somebody looks that their politics aligns with this notion of our common humanity. We've got to be smarter than that now. This isn't the 1850s when Henry Garnett, who became the first Black person to pray on the floor of the United States Senate, who also was a Civil War veteran, who in the 1850s was writing all that stuff, whose birthday was last week. This isn't that time when you could look at a Black person and say, okay, you Black, so we kind of know what your politics are. We're not in that time anymore. And they know it, which is why you're seeing more and more Black and non-white people. They're trying to recruit them. Rance Priebus tried to get them together before. Michael Steele tried to get them together before. But we've got some serious thinking to do as to how we need
because this is not a color, that symbol.
That's right.
This is not a color.
And he's not white.
He's not white. This is a power structure.
That's
and if you do not understand that, as Fuller would say, you're gonna be confused by everything else. You know, we're not fighting flesh and blood. We're not fighting melanin and non-melanin. We're fighting a power structure that will allow for all kind of people to come in to do its bidding. We watch this.
And I'm glad you said that too, because again, we're looking at Jim Clyburn. We're looking at some of the elders, Maxine Waters. You know, we wish them long lives, but politically, they're nearer the end than the beginning of their careers, much closer to the end. But when you see a Marjorie Taylor Greene talking respectfully to Jesse Jackson, please understand that you call them both Americans, but one is a white nationalist and a nativist. She would fit very comfortably with the know-nothings in the 1850s. She would fit very comfortably with the nativists. The other one has committed his life to America, but not exclusively. Just like we were talking Monday night with Vincent Harding, that metaphor Vincent Harding and Chancellor Williams used of the river. The river is something that overflows national boundaries. The river is people and ideas and spirit and sentiment. And so the fact that the two of them are both in the halls of Congress, they're bound by something called citizenship. This is the challenge. We've got to use that citizenship, but we can't use it in service of just a red, white, and blue flag. Because as you said, Marjorie Taylor Greene is like this. This is not an American symbol. This is a global symbol. Jesse has understood that his whole life, regardless of any arguments or debates we might get into Jesse in terms of his politics, political choices. The fact of the matter is that these people we fighting do not respect the four corners of the country called United States of America. They never have. They've got a global agenda. If we don't have a global agenda that we enact locally, we're going to end up getting caught up in a mess.
That's it. Stop all of that. Stop all of that. All right. We have like 5. Can we drop a breadcrumb on our sister who was born on this day? Zora Neale Hurston, born on this day. One of my sheroes who not just their eyes were watching God, but all of the work that she did to do the thing to preserve our vocal memories, our language memories. Just And they'll teach you. I just had son Michelle on again, the
Yes,
Harvard professor who's teaching the Geechee Gullah language there.
yes.
But he also said, I'm not giving away the sauce. I'm giving them the basics, but they're not getting the
Yeah,
for
but
real, for real.
you can't get that by mouth. That's got to be done in the culture. That's right.
Yeah, I loved him for saying that because I was like, "You giving away?" He was like, "No,
Can't do it.
giving you. We're gonna introduce you to it, but the real is what we live every day." Give us a breadcrumb for those who are not familiar with Zora Neale Hurston at all.
Well, I mean, that's definitely a shero. And shout out to your sister, our sister Tracy Sherrod. Remember when they dropped "You Don't Know Us Negroes"? I think you probably had one of the first copies. You shared it with us. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, that's definitely your ancestor. And so many of us. I mean, we identify, of course, with Eatonville, Florida, the black town where she was raised, but she's actually born in Alabama. So she's in Alabama by Notasulga, Alabama. John Hurston, her daddy, was a carpenter like Jesus and a preacher like Jesus. And Lucy Potts Hurston, who uh, taught school for a stretch. So very important to understand. She spent some time early in her life in Baltimore, Morgan Academy. Shout out to the Morgan State Bears. We know is the Morgan Academy is the foundation for that. Went to Howard University, was one of the founders of the Hilltop student newspaper that continues to this day. One of the young sisters and brothers who said, "Look, I'm as Jesus singing and gospel hymns singing as anybody, but I ain't going to chapel just because you want me to go." So they rebelled against mandatory chapel back in the 1920s. Raymond Walters, who wrote a book called The New Negro on Campus, writes about that student protest and that rebellion in the 1920s at Fisk and at Tuskegee and at Howard and other places. Again, my friend Matthew Jones, who just wrote the book on the Tuskegee student movement. Brian Jones, I'm thinking of Matthew Jones, Snick Singers. Brian Jones, I would encourage y'all to look at it. Zora Hurston, an amazing writer. And of course, we think about Zora Hurston. Of course, we talked about her at length. If y'all go to narrative, go to the archive, y'all see our conversations about Zora Neale Hurston. But she always had a gift for listening. And as we know, going back to Amadou Hampate Ba and all of the Jollies, listening is the foundation because we all have stories to tell. We all have narratives. And she had a gift for listening and then communicating and representing what she had heard, whether it be Mules and Men, or Tell My Horse, whether it be her novels, Their Eyes Were Watching God, whether they be her short stories, her fiction, her nonfiction, her essays, her letters, uh, Carla Kaplan's big volume of letters on Zora Neale Hurston. We use that when we sat with Zora Hurston and Kasula Olwe Lewis, our brother, who, of course, one of the last Africans brought to the United States on the Clotilda. And we have the gift of Zora Hurston's hearing and telling that story in Barracoon. Shout out, of course, to all of our fam who are Nubians and in Narrative Nation who are part of that community in Mobile, in Africa Town. My sister Fia Zakia, who's now with the descendant community there. Zora Hurston sat with him. And because she had that African ways of knowing and home training from those governance formations, she bring him peaches, she bring him something to eat, some peanuts, he help him clean up the yard. Some days he want to talk, some days he didn't want to talk. Some days he light his pipe, sit there and be quiet and stare off into space. And she just sit there with him. Why? Because she had what they call home training. Zora Hurston, of course, her friend Langston Hughes, they did work together. Sometimes they fell out because, she went to Barnard College. She studied with Columbia with Franz Boas because she was a trained anthropologist, but the training came from the community. Like Carter Woodson said, I was trained by my community. These schools gave me some degrees, but I was trained by my people. Zora Hurston, I mean, there's so much else we could talk about. But I want to end with this. A story that John Henry Clark used to tell about his friend John Glover Jackson from South Carolina, who was friends with Zora Neale Hurston. And he, John Henry Clark said, I'm walking down the street in New York and with John Jackson and Zora Neale Hurston coming toward us. And John Jackson said, "Here, take my money. What? Just hold it for me. Because here comes Zora. And if I got any money, she gonna ask me for it. I'm gonna give it to her." Zora Hurston had that kind of personality. And John Jackson told John Clark one time, I was with Zora Neale Hurston, and we was talking about going out or something. And I told her, you don't want to go out with me because I'm cantankerous. He said, Zora Neale Hurston put her hands on her chin like this and said, he said, what are you doing? He said, go ahead. She said, go ahead, cantank. I want to see. I mean, just that, you know what I'm saying? I mean, Zora Hurston was not going to let you get away with the simple thing. So anyway, that's the great Zora Hurston.
Yes. And the fact that for maybe 20, 30, 40 years, we forgot her. That's why I wanted to bring her up, because the exercise of Nubia narrative, the work that we do every Saturday, is for us to remember and never forget the people that came before us. Because of her works, we know about voodoo. People tried to plagiarize and steal her work. Because of her, we know about Kudju Lewis. We know about Kasula because of her. Because of her going into the community, because of her going to Jamaica and Haiti, we learned some things, right? We learned some things. And for her to basically die unknown, be in obscurity, and to fight so hard for that education that was denied her in so many places, to develop into a whole human being, we will never forget that she was born on this day, and the first free Black town in America that she grew up in, the first free Black town, incorporated, Eatonville, Florida.
Yeah, because we had Fort Mose and we had this dismal swamp. You know, Black folk gonna make some space.
Yeah, we're gonna always make a space, but incorporated in America. Yeah, and to this day they have a museum there that I've been to in Eatonville, Florida. Yeah, I mean it could be a lot more. I think it can be a lot more, but they have a festival every year in Eatonville in honor of this woman.
Well, you working on that. We're gonna claim one day we're gonna just be down there. We're gonna broadcast from there.
Absolutely.
I know you got us. I know you got us on track, Prop. Look, see, y'all see that hair rub. You know what that means.
Yes. All right, listen. I love you immensely. I'm gonna let me do this because I want to share my screen. Let me do this because let's end with this speech.
Yeah, let's see what Hakeem's talking about. Look, as far as I'm concerned, this is the kickoff of the Democratic primary in 2028. But judge for yourself if you didn't see it.
All right. Well, you know what? Let me unshare this. Let me stop sharing this. I want to share the other one because it's shorter. I hope I have it up. I have it up. Okay, hold on. Let me, because that's the whole speech. I want to just do.
And by the way, y'all, 23 is looking good. Narrative Nubia is just building out. We got, everybody, more and more people are coming. And so Monday night, y'all, we get into part 2. And then next Monday, not this Monday, but next Monday, that Dr. Black will be back from Kenya.
Oh, book. Let me tell you, that man could write.
Look,
I downloaded it into my Kindle. Because I'm like, I got to read this. That Daniel Black.
Daniel Black is no
the
joke.
Whole thing. Okay.
Yes, he is. Right. And a Nubian. So, all right, here we go.
Ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Love you too.
Yes.
Oh, can we hear it? Come on, speech. All right, hold on.
Compromise. But I also want to make clear that we will never compromise our principles. House Democrats will always put American values over autocracy, benevolence over bigotry, the Constitution over the code, democracy over demagogues, economic opportunity over extremism, freedom over fascism, governing over gaslighting, hopefulness over hatred, inclusion over isolation, justice over judicial overreach, knowledge over kangaroo courts, liberty over limitation, maturity over Mar-a-Lago, normalcy over negativity, opportunity over obstruction, people over politics, quality of life issues over QAnon, reason over racism, substance over slander, triumph over tyranny, understanding over ugliness, voting rights over voter suppression, working families over the well-connected, xenial over xenophobia, yes we can over you can't do it, and zealous representation over zero-sum confrontation. We will always do the right thing by the American people.